matters, the field level where changes actually happen. The reason they've asked me to do that is I took part in a workshop recently with them, and we're part of something called the Forest and Farm Facility, which is a multi-donor trust fund that directly funds forest and farm producer organizations. And I'm going to try and make the link between the climate finance study and that bit of work that I'm directly involved with. So the beginning, I guess, is to acknowledge that there's a finance gap, a climate finance gap. And total climate finance for both mitigation and adaptation in 2015-2016 was about US 410 billion. But of that, only 22 billion per year is committed to adaptation. So that's a very small amount of the total, most of the money going on mitigation, and most of the money being spent in developed countries for mitigation activities, so that about 18% reaches least developed countries out of that climate finance total. And in terms of the adaptation money, 22 billion committed to adaptation, only about 10% is getting to the local level, according to the recent work of my climate change team colleagues. Almost all of it public investment. There's very little sort of private sector investment getting levered into climate finance at the moment. So this is a problem because, according to UNEP and CPI, we need about 300 billion a year by 2030 to cope with the climate change adaptation needs of the very poor that are happening in developing countries. So there's a challenge, and it's a challenge on the one hand where we do need to keep climate finance focused on getting us to a plus 1.5 degree world. On the other hand, we have to recognize that that might not be very likely, and so we have to be preparing for adaptation to a 4 degree world, and so a little bit more of this adaptation style finance. At the moment, the business as usual scenario is that you've got sort of the primary investors, donors, mostly public, going through some sort of intermediary, often sort of big programs, to governments, to project developers, and eventually there's a trickle coming out the bottom for actual things that will help people to adapt. You can just see the administrative offtake of those various levels. So this is beyond what you spend the money on. This is when you decide to spend the money on local action, you have some offtake. And there's a problem here because there are layers of intermediation that are creating a sort of Chinese whispers of what actually needs to happen on the ground. The people at the top don't know. And what is happening on the ground, very little is feeding up. So high transaction costs is a function of business as usual. Somehow we're trying to get to this sweet spot in the middle where we have a low carbon economy that is also building social equality and meeting the SDGs and is sort of environmentally resilient. And I guess as we think of how to do that, we've got issues of concentration of economic power, political voice and equality, and sort of resource rights that are constraining what we can do. So the work that my climate change colleagues has been doing is really to try and encourage this view towards subsidiarity, getting the right decision making and the right finance mechanisms at the right level. They're not saying that you need to abandon the international level. Indeed, there are various important functions at the international level of agreeing goals and responsibilities and rules, and of course at the national level of setting macroeconomic policies and so on. But perhaps not enough attention is about getting to this local level and allowing direct flows of finance to this local level. So, what is it that what is the model we're trying to move towards? I guess you're moving away from this business as usual with many sort of intermediaries which don't lever in very much private sector finance, towards a model where you've got slightly more direct flows, less intermediaries, local funds being the primary aim of climate finance, and those funds somehow attracting in local investment. So that's the idea. That's what we're aiming for. And how do we get there? Well, what the climate change group at IIED has been doing with its partners is to look at local fund models, and if you can get access to their reports, you'll see that they've been doing case studies in different regions. The Babasu Fund in Brazil, one example that I remember, the Tree Bank program in Thailand as another example. And so they've been trying to look at funds that are actually functioning at the local level and doing good work in climate finance and seeing how they emerged. And there are four main building blocks that seem to be common to these local funds that are actually getting money where it matters. Firstly, they have a sort of a function of aggregating local climate action. So they've got some kind of organizational structure across multiple communities where that action is taking place. So that's important both for aggregating the climate action upwards and for distributing the finance downwards. Secondly, there's a strong emphasis on trust building, getting organizational models that are bottom-up and truly owned and managed by local community groups. There's an important sort of phase of rule-making, setting the direction and rules so that issues of rights and inclusion within the funding mechanism are addressed from the get-go. And finally, there's, in all cases so far that they've looked at, there's a strong sort of element of building capacity needs, not least for financial management. So that's the sort of building blocks that are required for these sort of 10% of local finance that climate finance is reaching. And so they've put together this model, and I think it's quite a useful one, of the main building blocks of getting finance, climate finance, to where it matters, thinking about organizational structures that aggregate multiple community or smallholder or indigenous people's action and can be responsible for distributing finance. A lot of work on decision-making and organizational structure. Quite a lot of support for financial management and results reporting. Climate finance requires good reporting, credible reporting, so quite a lot of capacity building needs to happen for that to work. And finally, sort of shifting incentives, partly because, as I'll explain shortly, people organize for a variety of reasons at local level, not just to do climate change mitigation and adaptation. They organize for all sorts of other economic reasons. And if you get the right sort of incentives, the same organizational structures that might market timber products could be used to distribute climate finance at the local level. So let me race through each of these. I'll try and keep this bit short. So there's sort of lessons they've been learning about aggregation to reach scale. The idea that you need to disaggregate finance down and aggregate needs and impacts data to funders. collecting results and telling a compelling story. The elements of building trust, both internal trust within the organization and trust between that organization and the climate finance community. So the robustness of financial management. Setting the directions and rules, having a strategic shared purpose for what the organization is really trying to achieve. Often successful organizational models, climate finance, has benefited from peer-to-peer exchanges so that people are learning about what's working in one place and then replicating it in another place. And finally, this element of capability building, trying to have these iterative learning processes and a lot of support for financial management, transparent and accountable systems, and reporting. So that's the work of my climate change colleagues, and now I'm just going to switch into something I know something about. And that's the work of this forest and farm facility, which is managed by the FAO, but it's a partnership of IUCN and IIED, AgriCorps, which is an interesting group of European agri-agencies, smallholder farmers in Europe who are helping their colleagues through the forest farm facility. And the idea is that aggregation is vitally important if we're to make climate resilience and mitigation work alongside sustainable development. So generally, people organize at different levels in forest and farm landscapes. They organize at the local level to produce stuff. Usually they organize to cut costs and get into markets. They want to have enough people growing star anise or cinnamon or pepper or timber to be able to sell it to the markets. Often these sort of local groups are then organized at a regional level to improve their marketing by processing equipment to process or package product, develop credit support systems for local producers, develop the capacity to manage projects. And sometimes these regional organizations are then aggregated at national level to have policy and advocacy. So these are natural functions of organization. They've nothing necessarily to do with climate finance, but I'm going to try and show how they might be useful. So, oh, look. So here's an example, Guatemala. It's very organized. We all know it from community forestry. So in Guatemala, you have sort of 250 or more local organizations who do things like grow cocoa and coffee and cardamom and timber and all sorts of different crops. And they're organized into 11 major regional associations, and those associations do the marketing and product development. I'm going to be focusing on this one here in Alta Verapaz, just for your information. But they're also aggregated into a single national alliance, the Alianza, that works very closely with government and has managed to get an incentive program worth 1% of GDP to feed back down directly to those farmer organizations. So this is a mechanism that is distributing national finance already down to local producer organizations. And it's something that climate finance could make use of. So here you have Fedecovera in Alta Verapaz, and they're the world's largest exporter of cardamom. They also have cocoa. They're a timber producer. There's a seedlings production. They run an ecotourism business, coffee production, and so on. And when you look at this second-level regional organization, it's quite well established. It has forestry, technical assistance, health and sort of well-being, financial accounting, training. It has a credit. It has a financial credit. It's part of Ban Rural, which is Guatemala's biggest bank. And so it manages a program of about $7 million of credit for its member cooperatives. It also runs a business school, a business incubation school for its forest and farm producer organization members at local level. So it's teaching people how to run sustainable businesses. It groups them into product-related clusters. It then links them to governance, legal permits, and so on, research and development, business, markets, technical advice, all of this sort of stuff. And the funding for it comes from various sources, which I haven't got the time to explain. So what I'm suggesting is that these sorts of organizations are a very good way of getting finance down to local level, because they've already been set up for purposes of getting product up to international level, and they have good finance systems that work to do so. But they don't exist everywhere. So that level of organization doesn't exist in many countries. What the Forest and Farm Facility is trying to do is to make that happen in different places, to facilitate it. So, for example, in Kenya, we're working with the Forest and Farm Smallholder Producers Association of Kenya. It's called FFSPAC, and it's about 10,000 members strong. And it's primarily a group of people, farmers, who are growing trees on farm. So it's a way of enriching and diversifying farm systems through the inclusion of trees. What usually happens is that you have to start with explaining very carefully the reasons for working together, so for collective action. And it really helps if that initial organizational step is driven by the people involved, because that makes for robust organizations. If you try and force it, as many countries have tried to do with forced cooperative movements, it often backfires. Early on, you need to get to incubating good financial management systems. And whether these are being set up purely for a climate finance reach-down program or for a much more integrated business and climate setup, you need to invest quite a lot in financial systems. Gradually, at some point, you need to think about formalizing the institution, because for reporting reasons and investment reasons, people don't like working with informal organizations, although that's where most organizations are in developing countries. And finally, as I've tried to illustrate with the Fede-Covera example, after 40 years of careful strengthening, you can get some really quite advanced, mature organizations that can build the local financial management capability of smaller groups at local levels and kind of aggregate and distribute. So there's a need at the beginning for these partnerships, which gradually diminishes over time. And I guess our ambition in the Forest Farm Facility is eventually to do ourselves out of business. And that should surely be the aim of all our institutions, is that ultimately these things are self-financing. So the money is not just coming from climate finance in our vision. That's a very important part of it, because a lot of this sort of early work needs to be catalyzed. But ultimately, the money is being generated from the sustainable production of integrated agroforestry and farming systems. So it'll take care of itself with or without climate finance. And that's the sort of vision. Of course, this also works for broader development goals. It's not something that is somehow separate from the sustainable development goals. In fact, if you look at how do you make the SDGs work in forestry, you have in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, forests and forest landscapes contribute to almost all of the 17 outcomes, whether it's sort of gender equity or carbon, so decent jobs, reduced poverty, biodiversity, all of these things are outcomes. But when you look at the targets for the SDGs, the many, many targets, they're often the things that need to be in place to enable the delivery. And when you group those, you can find that actually, a lot of these have to do with organizing smallholders into viable organizations, shifting the incentives from non-sustainable to sustainable, giving the sort of technical support and capability building that my climate change colleagues are talking about, and building this sort of resource tenure, security and trust at the institutional level. So it is something that's universal and transformative and integrated, I hope, and I think that's the sort of model of getting money where it matters that we need to be pursuing, that it's not somehow a separate thing. We're not trying to create a whole load of new climate finance organizations at local level. We're trying to adapting and making use of the organizational structures that exist at local level to get climate finance where it matters. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if there's somebody who has some clarifying questions or questions to clarify at the moment. Then, if not, then we'll come back to this in the discussion later, and I'll ask Maxime to try and link what Duncan said to their own program of IUCN.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Maxime IJsselin. I work at IUCN in the Netherlands. So not IUCN International, but IUCN Netherlands. Our vision is to have a just world that values and conserves nature. I'm an expert in green economy. I've been working on climate finance issues for the last 4 years to see how to bring it from the international level to the local level. And I see a lot of connections with our work with IIED, which I want to present. So I think we can very much benefit and also contribute to your experiences, to your framework with the 4 pillars. I think there we could collaborate on that actually, and also see how we can define the architecture of who can be the exact aggregator, the translator and the broker. Maybe IUCN can even do that. And I think also you were also talking a little bit about the impact narratives. They're very important. I think it is very important to influence investors. So the investors know that the finance has an impact on the ground, and we are also working a lot with technologies like drones, satellite images. Maybe we can also add a little bit on your work on that side, and start maybe influencing trajectories together for investors, so they know better where the impact is and how much it is. And I think we also work a lot with local partners in the global south, and I think we can also structure a lot of international finance in order for these partners to tap into this finance. I think Paulino, she will sit in the panel after this, and she can talk a little bit about her experiences of international climate finance. So what is IUCN doing now in terms of finance? Well, we do a couple of things. First of all, what we want to do is to spread the knowledge that a stable financial sector can only be in place when we have a stable natural world. We think nature is the fundament of society and of economies. So only if you have a very good stable nature, then also the financial sector will be much more stable. So therefore it's important to invest in nature. Also, we have a lot of financial institutions that manage trillions of dollars, and they are trying to align it with SDGs, but they cannot find the right projects, and we want to help them finding the right projects, and we do that by we have a program called Mobilizing More, and we are helping entrepreneurs to make their case investable, and also deliver these cases to investors. And we also give advice on how to pitch their case. And we also want to remove the perception that nature is not investable. We want to show that you can invest in nature with very, very good, reliable projects with a low risk and some return. And we also made some products on how to get the international finance to local levels. For instance, the LIFT is the Landscape Investment Finance Tool, and we also have, and IUCN also has the ROAM study, the Restoration Opportunity Assessment methodology. So that was my talk for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxime. I think you see you grab your bag already. So I really want to I really want to thank you for your presentation, because I think it's really shows very well. And I think this slide for me is kind of important, that in the end we're not just looking at climate finance. What we want to do is this combination of SDGs, and we'll probably see later in the Sorry, it's kind of blocking my ears, this hearing two things at the same time. So we want to look at the different SDGs together, and we'll find of the examples too, that you cannot just look at one single objective. I think Uganda was already mentioned, the same thing in Vietnam. You have to look at everything together in order to actually generate activities which then can generate their own funding. So we'll look at some of that. I just want to mention also, that so we see here there is studies on the financial flows. There's empirical studies, but there's also need to broaden bring those results of the studies to the different actors. And really this session we're hoping to start doing that, but both Tropendros, IUCN, and the Forest Trees and Agroforestry program of the CGIAR, we have this fits in a longer-term program. Maxime mentioned the Mobilizing More activities, but there's also research going on. We're at the moment trying to interview different people along that line, from the local to the international financiers. And actually Duncan was the first one to be interviewed there. And we hope to meet some other people during the GLF to interview. But the idea is to actually bring them together, to get to know first the different perspectives, because you can talk to Duncan and he has his view, or IIED and FFF have a similar view. There will be investors that may have a different view. I've been talking to investors that say, well, our problem is there's no projects, and Maxime already mentioned that. But if you go to people in the field, they say, well, we have projects, we cannot get the finance. So why don't these people match? What is the reason why they don't match? So we're looking at examples where it functions. And we're trying to draw lessons from that, to be able to give recommendations on the potential factors to success or failure. And so that is, in the end, we're basically starting that program now. We're working in it in the coming years. We hope then to come in 2-3 years to some really concrete suggestions. But where should we invest? Either in enabling conditions? What are the main factors that we should try and resolve, so that there will be a leverage for this local generation of activities, which no longer will be needing specific external finance. I think that for me was a very interesting thing that I hadn't seen previously in the IIED presentation. Yeah, I think that is a good lesson for us to learn. That's where we have to look at. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, may I invite then Peter van Mitwoud as one of our panelists. Yeah, and then Marta Tollenaar. Yeah, and sorry, a very difficult name for me. Nitran Hu, no? Yeah, and Pauline Nangtombo. Yeah, can I invite you up in front here? And they will be your panelists for today. We can maybe, if you want, we put this on the side. Yeah. So you can choose whether you want to stand or sit while you give a brief presentation. To Peter and Marta. Oh, that's Peter and Marta, they are members of different, I'm not sure if I can say investing organizations, but they do have money and they do invest in local programs. So we will hear how they actually manage to do just that, what Duncan said, that is not happening so often. Yeah, and then we also hear from Pauline and from Nee. Both of them are from local or national NGOs, which form part of these brokers, which mentioned Duncan. Yeah, how they actually have been able to aggregate organizations, or what are the challenges to actually come to aggregation? What are the challenges that, in the case of Vietnam, coffee makers have, and in the case of Pauline in Uganda, is much more the challenge of these brokering organizations, how to get finance and to distribute the finance to the different organizations. So I don't know who wants to start. I think Peter is really set up for it. You have your presentation there already, or?
Yes. It's on my USB, so it's just there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Peter, can I ask you to start?
Is this connected to the internet? Do you know this?
That I don't know.
Documentary movie directed by Craig Norris with the title Kokota, the Island of Hope, located all the living groups.
That's not what I was looking for.
You may have to pull it there. Yes, I think that's
Shall I use the microphone?
So who of you is familiar with Ecosia? Yeah, almost everyone. So we are the search engine that plants trees. That's how people say we are, and that's what we do. And I'm Ecosia's tree planting officer, and that means that I make sure that these trees actually get planted. So Ecosia works just like any other search engine. If you search something up, let's say you want a hotel in Bonn. Okay, now I looked for something else. But anyways, you know how it means, how it works. This is not working in the. I'll just go back. Okay, so you can search with us like with any other search engine, and you can do it for me if you want. But just leave it; it's fine. You know how it works. You can click on advertisements. This one is really loud. If you click on an advertisement, we make some money. That's how Google makes money. In fact, Google makes 65 billion every year with that. We spend half of the money that comes in every month on planting trees. So if Google would do the same, we would have 10% of the 300 billion that is needed in 2030. We would already have together. So it's a really powerful model. Ecosia only has less than 0.1% of the global search engine industry. And already we are able to have a turnover of around €1 million every month. And we spend half of that on planting trees. But we can grow much bigger. So if more and more people use us, we will get more money and we can plant more trees. That's really how the system works. This was not invented by someone who studied forestry, but by someone who studied economics, which I think is a good thing. We are also a company. So it really means that we approach our reforestation projects also as a company. So we're looking at, where can we save money? How can we optimize the processes? Everything like that. Till now, we have planted 43 million trees. Actually, we have 80 million trees contracted that will be planted so far. We have spent 8 million euros on tree planting, and 4.8 million of that was from last year alone, or this year, 2018. So it shows that we're really having a kind of grow going on right now that we haven't seen before, which is really cool. The question that was asked to me is, how do we make sure we get this money actually to the right places, and what are the challenges that we're facing? How does it work? We have at the moment about 19 projects worldwide that are planting trees for us. And this tree planting is based on a service contract. So we pay a certain organization to plant trees for us. And each of these organizations, they have their own way of doing that. Many of them have been active in reforestation in some way or another already for quite some years. Then they come to us, or we go to them, and together we make a plan for the coming year. What do they need? How many trees do they want to plant? What is their relation with the communities? What kind of tree species do they want to plant? What is the impact that they're foreseeing of these trees on the ground? Our kind of super high level criteria is that all our projects should have an impact on people and on nature. So it means that the trees should have a value to the people that plant them, but also nature should benefit from it. That is kind of the high level criteria for every program. So once they can show me how they will do that, then we make a budget together, we make a planning together, we make a cash flow together, and then we make a contract, normally for 1 or 2 years. If that goes well, we'll make another contract. Also in these contracts, we said exactly when we pay them. So very often there's an upfront payment because they have to set up or scale up their nurseries. Then an additional payment might be made just before the planting season starts. Then when all the trees are planted, then it's actually the biggest part of the sum that's paid when they can show me where all the trees are planted. For that they have to send me polygons, the areas where they've planted, or the points at the farms where they have been planted. They have to send me pictures that have a geo reference, so I can really see that the work took place. I also visit most of these projects. If you follow IICOSIA on Twitter or on YouTube, we provide a lot of videos where I'm visiting projects and where we show what we're actually doing. So this is how we get the money to the projects. Also, what I learned, one of the things we developed this year is a scorecard. So we're scoring every project to see how they're doing. And the way this scorecard works a little bit is again with a bit of a business mind. We are all familiar with the triple bottom line. There should be an economic impact, a natural impact, and a social impact. But we think it should also be the other way around. So the social part, so the people that live in the area should also give something back. And nature should also give something back. Because that's not because we want to become rich or capitalists or whatever. The point is that you become equal partners and you're working together towards the same aim. We are not an ATM that gives you money to plant trees. They should invest time in kind or set up the nurseries or do other stuff. So together we are kind of equal partners on working on the reforestation. It doesn't always work like that in practice. Sometimes we're disappointed on how things work, but that's where we're aiming towards too. The challenges that we're facing, this will be my last point. As was already a bit indicated by Duncan in his presentation, the reporting from the ground. So I require from our partners to send me exact locations where everything is planted, the numbers of the trees, the tree species, pictures of that. Sounds like something relatively easy for us. It's not if you're in the highlands of Peru or if you're in Ethiopia where there's hardly any internet or wherever in this world where we work. Secondly, what I really find is that the local capacity is a bit of an issue. I think the problem is that tree planting and reforestation, till a couple of years ago, was really a kind of NGO-ish thing. So organizations that are used to live from donor money do their work, and when the money is gone, they hope someone else will give them money again. And they've learned to kind of survive that way. But never someone came to them and said, make a plan for the coming 5 years, make exactly your budget, show how you want to do it, what is the cash flow you need, etc. These are not things that they're used to do. The first time they do that very often is with us. But it means it's a new world that they have to enter, and that requires time. And I see some very promising results with some of the groups we work with. But it also requires technical capacity. You know, how do they scale up the work with the different villages? How do they make sure that once they scale up from an investment of 200,000 to maybe 600,000 a year, that they have to grow their team and have enough extension officers in the field? This sounds all very obvious, but it's not so easy to find the right people and to set these things in place. So that's the challenge I see. And the third challenge, we really want to create a business case around these trees. And it doesn't necessarily have to be from day one on. I think we should not think that all the trees in this world can be a business case. If that would be the case, there would be trees everywhere. But it also doesn't mean that we should only think all the trees have to be back because someone is donating money. There is a lot of businesses that can be based on tree products. So we're working with our partners to develop these. And this can be, for example, in Burkina Faso, we are doing a lot of restoration in the desert, so the border between the Sahel and the Sahara. And when you bring trees back in this savanna landscape, in between the trees from year 2 or 3 on, you can already start doing some agriculture. So we're doing a big experiment with haricot vert, with green beans. That's a very powerful thing, because this whole degraded landscape, in my view, all of a sudden becomes the largest bean producing area of the world. So this is how we start to look at things. But to make these business cases that will not only benefit the local people, but that also are actually a business case that brings a little return, that is the next challenge that we're working on with our projects. That's where I wanted to leave it. Please use Ecosia. It really helps. It plants trees. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Marta, can I invite you then to?
Okay, good morning. My name is Marta Tollenaar. I work as environmental and social manager for a company called New Forests. And I work out of their office in Singapore. So I was also asked to explain how we interpret the flow of finances from the high level to the ground, and to make that work at a local level to benefit climate and other ESG goals. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we do at New Forests, we were founded in 2005, and our mission is to manage institutional forestry investments. We focus on productive use and long-term stewardship of the landscapes that we manage. So today we have around $3.5 billion in assets and committed capital, and close to 1 million hectares under management worldwide. So that leaves us at one of the largest forestry investments in the world. We have our head office in Sydney, and Australia and New Zealand. That region is also where the bulk of our assets is. But we also have a small fund in Southeast Asia, the Tropical Asia Forest Fund, where we manage long-term investments in sustainable plantation forestry in the region. So we deliver wood supply to Asia, to the local market, but also to the European market. And to date, we're the only institutional timberland investment manager with a sustainability objective that is operational in the region. We've invested into 3 assets in the region, in Laos, in Indonesia, and Malaysia. And my role is then to secure the environmental and social side of things, so make sure that we have that shared value approach in place. So what we see in our objectives to reach that sustainable investment or sustainable landscape in Southeast Asia, we see a number of challenges that we link to. We see climate change happening, so we see that the wet seasons are out of tune, right? We see dry seasons kicking in way too soon. We see a major loss of biodiversity in the whole region, huge rampant deforestation throughout Southeast Asia. We see scarcity of resources. We see a lack of social inclusion and equality. Big major themes that we need to work with. And what we aim to do is provide a solution to each and every one of these challenges, and we do that through our sustainable landscape investment framework. I won't go into detail on that, but if you want more information, I can give it to you after. And we implement shared value strategies. So everywhere we operate, and this links to the theme of the day, we make sure that we include the local communities, that we include the smallholders and the smaller businesses. So we do that through a number of strategies, and I've just, because I was asked to speak only 5 minutes today, I've just highlighted 3. There are obviously more. So we address land tenure claims through the development of community partnerships. So we work together closely with communities. We set up their businesses. We have outgrow schemes in place. We support smallholder farmers. So I'd say we don't use climate investment yet. We use our own business model, right? But we use that to benefit climate at the local level. We integrate smallholders into our business. So in each of our 3 investments, we have a smallholder model that we feel works best at that particular site. So for instance, in Laos, we have an outgrower scheme with around 5,000 farmers that are working together with us, that we support in providing trees and seedlings. We then support them in terms of training, in terms of management, and we can then offer them a secure market as well by buying back those trees. What we can further do to enhance the sustainability is to support them in achieving certification, for instance, FSC certification, PFC certification, so that we make sure that they operate on a sustainable level and that we can market those products for a premium price as well. What might be interesting for you as well to know is that we will be working with climate finance as well. So it will be integrated into our business model. We're a commercial investor, right? So we're not a grant funding organization. But what we're looking at now is to integrate impact finance into our next fund. We're raising TAF2, so Tropical Asia Forest Fund 2 for the future. So we're aiming to raise around $300 million in forestry. And we hope to get part of that out of an impact investment fund so that we blend the 2 finance streams into one major fund that we can use. So we have a number of impact investors that are interested to take a lower return in return for a higher ESG outcome. And that markets well to the mainstream investors that will be in that fund as well, because by doing that, we reduce the risk that is related to investing in a region like Southeast Asia, where the government might not be stable, the markets might not be stable, things happen quite rapidly. There are high ESG risks related to that. If we have an impact investor and we have that additional money that we can spend on goals like climate, like social development, like biodiversity enhancement, we can mitigate those risks and give comfort to the mainstream investors to catalyze more investment into this framework. So that's one of the ways that we try and catalyze impact investment and use that at the local level. Good thing is that we do see an increasing interest from development finance institutions like FMO in the Netherlands, like IFU in Denmark, like FinFund, who are already invested into our first fund. And philanthropic foundations as well, to invest or to co-invest with the private sector. We also see that there is funders with an emphasis on non-financial returns, which is great for us to see because we can use that into our fund. We see a willingness to accept additional risk relative to the potential returns, and we can see that all of this can help address the barriers that we currently perceive to sustainable landscape investments. Challenges are remaining. We need to continue to work on mitigating the risks that are related to these investments. As I said, we are currently the only institutional investor in Southeast Asia that's doing this. That means it's new. That means it's risky. And specifically, mainstream investors are still reluctant in many cases to do this. For instance, Asian investors, we can't get them to cooperate with us. They find it too risky. They're not used to this commodity. So it's up to us to educate these people and to build a track record that shows them that it's safe, it's a good business case, there is high returns that can be made within a sustainable investment framework. Another challenge that we face is that we still compete with irresponsible or non-responsible businesses. So the Asian market, the Chinese market still does not demand certified products, so they're okay with a plethora of different legal and illegal sources, which means that there is a competition for land in terms of responsible and irresponsible business cases. So we build up a pipeline of project for our next fund, and in that pipeline we see when we make a bid, we compete with Chinese investors that have a less responsible business case that might still be competitive, out-competing our project proposals. Again, impact finance might help here because we can place a higher bid using that impact finance to make sure that we can achieve our sustainability goals in that landscape as well. I think that's the main, I think that's the main points I wanted to leave you with. Just to let you know, I've got a couple of leaflets here as well. This one is on sustainable landscape investment in Southeast Asian forestry, and it outlines the relation with the SDGs, climate finance, impact finance, etc. So feel free to grab one if you want. Thanks.
Thank you, Marta. Okay, after then 2 points of view from the finance sector, we like to invite Pauline, who has been working with different sources of finance and trying to bring it really close to the communities.
Thank you very much. As he has introduced me, my name is Pauline Nantongo Kalunda. I come from Uganda. I work with an NGO that specializes in conservation finance. We work with smallholder farmers. These are farmers that own between 1 hectare and 5 hectares. They live in forested landscapes. They are not commodity farmers like coffee farmers or cocoa farmers. These are farmers that grow beans, maize, bananas, everything to raise their families. They depend on the forests for water, for building materials, for medicine, for food. All their entire existence and livelihoods depend on the forests. So they have a personal interest in maintaining trees in the landscape, or they have an interest, a genuine interest in maintaining forests in their landscapes. However, they are not able to access the markets. They're not able to access financing. And one of the experiences, or the experience that I'm going to draw from, is one that supports them to access the carbon markets, the voluntary carbon markets. If you have tried to interact with that market, you will understand that it's designed in a manner that does not have them in mind. The background information to the papers and all the conferences that we attend, it's inclusion, it's bottom up, and so on and so forth. But when you read the documentation and you read the requirements to access those facilities and systems, you realize that either they didn't mean the bottom up, or they really have no clue who we are talking about. So in addition to that, okay, for example, in the carbon market, these are performance-based payments, whereby at the beginning, there's really no carbon to sell. But you're expecting that a rural, poor, smallholder farmer will invest first and then get the credits later. There is only one standard that issues ex-ante credits. That's the Plan Vivo standard. And this standard is not acceptable in most of the climate finance systems. It's only private sector, a handful of private sector that have committed themselves to purchase credits from those people because they understand the social and biodiversity and other core benefits that come from it. So the way we do it, we develop aggregation the smallholder way. We take the smallholder story, we sit down with them in meetings and workshops in which they design and come up with a vision on how they would like their landscape to look like. So for us as experts, we take their vision and technically specify the activities within the vision to quantify the climate, the biodiversity, and watershed functions that are going to come out of those credits. And then the other thing that we do, we use their own institutions. For example, many of these people, if we were to give them their cash transfers in the commercial banks, even the cost of transportation to go and get the money from the bank would remove 50% of the payment that they are going to receive. So what we do is we work with the village savings and loans associations, and then it's that association that will have an account with the bank, and everybody gets their money through that village saving and loans association. And what eventually happens is that the smallholder farmer is able to use their payment for environmental services agreement to access loan from the village savings and loans associations. Even for governance, we work with the community-based organizations. Some of them, half of them are informal. It's only after they've participated in the program for a few years that they develop the formal systems that adapt whatever governance, whatever grievance redress arrangements that they've already agreed upon as peers, and then we technically specify that to look like a formal institution, as opposed to bringing what we know, what a CBO looks like or what an NGO looks like, and then impose it down onto these organizations. We also develop capacity, local capacity. Among the farmers, we develop people to become technicians, to give extension services to their peers. We train people in how to monitor the performance of the different agreements, because we are striving to leave at least 60% of the money that comes from the market to stay within the communities that we are working with. We also have a risk buffer. We have two types of risk management. We have a buffer of unsold carbon, or the carbon credits that are generated. At least 10% of it is not sold, to be able to buffer against risk of non-delivery. But in addition to that, every ton of carbon that is sold makes a contribution to a community carbon fund that is able to support farmers that may be disproportionately affected by extreme weather conditions, to be able to recover from the loss that incur. And with this community-owned system, where the farmer, at the end of the day, they come together as a group, but every farmer retains the tenure to their land, to the trees, and to the carbon credits that are generated from this system. We've been able to mobilize $6 million as foreign direct investment for smallholder agroforestry from the climate market, from the voluntary market. And we've been able to sequester more than 1.2 million tons of carbon dioxide. We are now at the scale of where annually we bring in between 1 to 1.2 million US dollars for the smallholders, and 60% goes to the individual household, not to the system, not to the community-based organization, not to the NGO, but to the household itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pauline. Nii, can I ask you to come up?
My presentation away. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nghi. Very difficult to pronounce Vietnamese name, but you just remember in English. My name is Friendship. Yeah, Friendship enough. Different with the previous presentation talk, I am very deeply into very low levels, local and problem in our landscape. Because we are working in Green Livelihood Alliance together with IUCN Netherlands and Friend of the Earth. and we are very much concerned about what landscape change and what is the role of different actors inside. And this talk, we focus very much on coffee plantation. This slide shows you where Vietnam is and where the landscape of Central Island is. This is a very important landscape in Vietnam because you see that the massively coffee plantation, because Vietnam nowadays become second coffee exporter in the world. And you see that yearly we got about 1.6 or nearly 2 billion US dollar, and about productivity 1.8 million ton of coffee exporting not only to Europe market but also other international market. And I would say this coffee plantation is one of the underlying reason for deforestation in Central Island, or in, let's say that, in our landscape. And not only deforestation but also causes a lot of problem, non-technical issue. Later on I will talk with you. You see that coffee in Vietnam, mainly we plant Robusta, and you see that Robusta consume a lot of water for irrigation. So Central Island is one of the very high elevation place that need a lot of water. But in Vietnam, in Central Island, we have only 2 seasons per year, dry season and rainy season. And recently, that with some phenomena of climate change, that dry season become longer and longer. So people lack a lot of water for irrigation. That's also a big problem in Central Island, or let's say in our landscape nowadays. Not only climate change, but also with the epidemic disease, also a big problem for coffee grower. This is cost a lot of, I would say that a lot of money, or let's say a big investment for epidemic or disease or treatment of local farmer. One of the big issue that farmer don't know how to deal with that. With assistance from extension center, but sometimes they even no option because they cannot invest more money for that. Other problem in our country nowadays is that people use a lot of chemical, for example, herbicide, pesticide, and other chemical affected in the agriculture product. Like recently, EU market also give a warning that if some chemical accumulated in agriculture product, that they deny to import. That's very important for us to know and to do lobby advocacy for the time being. And you see that even that climate change, deforestation, epidemic, but not really big problem with the other non-technical issue. That, for example, nature resource governance in our country is still very weak. Participation, or let's say participation, involvement from different actors in a landscape is very low, and especially local farmer involved in decision making is really limited. So how the project like IUCN or Tropenbos now they involved in CGIAR have to do a lot of lobby advocacy in order to make better decision policy for coffee plantation. You see that? Sorry, I not only that problem, but also another problem that how to deal with the big consumer like Acom, Louis, or Nestle, or even EU market. We have to do a lot of research and do a lot of combining with influencing policy in order to influence to the market, like EU market say no with deforestation coffee, or coffee with using that kind of chemical, even negative impact for health. People should say about that. So in order to do that, we have to make a lot of research, and research combining with policy influence, and later on we have to do a lot of things. I think that is one of the very important objective of the GIAR that we involve nowadays in Central Ireland. I think that's because I have only 5 minutes to talk about that. Maybe I prefer that if you have any question, please contact me. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we have a small issue here then in the programming, because there's too many sessions. They're asking us to move here to the site to continue the discussion. But what I want to look at, we saw several examples where actually, in some cases, the investors actually are the brokers as well. They sit down with local organizations looking at how to best invest. Yeah. We saw that financial literacy is a major problem. Yeah, strengthening the capacities to actually be able to plan. Yeah, and also technical capacities are important. Yeah, but we also saw that in